This is the story of Malakai Makaisson. Genius inventor, intrepid adventurer, vicious slayer. A dwarf disgraced for daring to think bigger. In this saga, he went toe-to-toe with the ruinous chaos powers, united the fractured dwarf holds and human kingdoms against a common enemy, and sailed headlong into oblivion in an attempt to put a pause on the ever-encroaching end times. And all that might sound unfamiliar, and that's because I made it up. Using Total War Warhammer III, I set Malakai off to create a new legend, the one I will recount for you today. This is the very uncanon story of Malakai Makaisson, the engineer who sought his doom, but inadvertently may have saved the world. Our tale begins as most tend to. Malakai Makaisson and his retinue of slayers and heroes were alone in the world, with a war party of unruly and insignificant marauders standing between them and their greater goals.
This will misfire!
These followers of Nurgle, while repulsive, had the clear disadvantage of being on the ground. So when the engineers sent in the gyrocopters, they sat back and reveled in the flurry of white-hot brimstone and yellow-green sludge that painted the battlefield. With this mild annoyance dealt with, Malakai plotted his next move carefully. He set his compass east, blasting and bombing any trouble along the way, though said trouble found them mere moments into their maiden voyage. As nestled behind a nearby mountain range, scurried the insidious Skaven menace of Clan Moulder. There were two choices here. Option 1. Malakai sails on by, pretends he didn't see anything, and hopes the Skaven are too busy arguing amongst themselves to pose a real threat. Option 2. Divert course, man the guns and lay waste to every Iraqi in sight, collapse their tunnels, burn their burrows, paint the snow black with their blood. It's no surprise that the Slayer and his retinue hastily went with the second option. Throt the Unclean and his Skaven masses cowered before the armada of war machines barreling down on them, and the dwarves marveled as their gyrocopters and airships decimated the Ratman lines, scorching their territories and laying waste to their shoddy contraptions. They are a unruly and undisciplined bunch at the best of times, but against the aerial might of the Slayer engineer, they had no hope. Somewhat dismayed that Clan Moulder put up such little resistance, Malakai pushed on to capture their main stronghold, Hell Pit.
Get the gold! Inventing's not a cheap business!
A horrific labyrinth of untold horrors and wicked energies, with twisted Skaven creations skulking in every crack and crevice. The dwarfs were sure that nothing could possibly go wrong in colonizing such a place. They figured they'd have a go at renovating Hell Pit, but the other Skaven settlements were a tad too destitute for their liking. So they used them as a bargaining chip. Kislev was suspiciously eager to snatch up these Iraqi-infested holds, but who was Malakai to question the art of the deal? They got their settlement, he got a powerful ally protecting his rear while he carried on his path of ruin eastwards. A win-win for all involved. Or so he thought. What he hadn't banked on was said human nation of Kislev, the shield that protects the Empire, to go and attack said Empire. Malakai realized he had maybe made some questionable bedfellows, though he wasn't the only one. As they departed east, they ran into a familiar face. Ulrika Magdova Stragov, former flame to Felix Jaeger, oathbound chronicler of Gottrick Gurnason, and these two were some of Makaisson's most prolific crew members. And this might sound like some touching romantic reunification, except for the part where Ulrika was a vampire. On one hand, this vile hellspawn would surely feast on them when their backs were turned. On the other, Felix is but a weak, desire-driven madling. So he made the case to Malakai to bring her along on the journey. He was sure it would all be fine. But anyway, this isn't the story of Felix's misguided and often unsuccessful pursuits of love. With Ulrika aboard, the Spirit of Grungni continued its path of destruction eastward, until they ran into another old acquaintance. But this time, it was an acquaintance of the dwarfs, which, 9 times out of 10, means enemy. Astrogoth Ironhand and his Chaos Dwarf followers were some of the most loathsome creatures around, sharing that title with the Greenskins, Vampires, Beastmen, Skaven, and Elves. The Dawizar spat on everything the dwarf stood for. And despite being an exile himself, Malakai knew he could not let their transgressions slide and commanded his retinue to battle stations. They met Ostrogoth at Karak Vlak, a location that proved advantageous to the dwarves. The good ones, not the bad ones. A natural choke point allowed Malakai's robust warriors to hold a line against the savage orcs and noblars under Ostrogoth's command, while his artillery battered the Dawizar positions. As the dwarfs, the bad ones, not the good ones, surged towards Makaisson's position, he sent in the gyrocopters to rain ruin down on them from above. Each time they met on the battlefield, Malakai outmaneuvered and outgunned his infernal foe, and little by little the Dawizar were pushed back, and the northern Darklands were reclaimed by the dwarves, the good ones, not the bad ones.
Sure these good folk are happy to donate.
Though any celebrations were cut short as the Dark Powers had caught wind of Malakai's intentions. The despicable King of the Trolls, Throg, took advantage of Malakai's absence and launched an attack from the west, while Arbal the Undefeated sent his Chaos Legions across the seas to wreak havoc on the newly retaken dwarf holds. Malakai wasn't worried. Arbal the Undefeated. That didn't mean he couldn't be defeated. Bear in mind, this is the dwarf who created the ironclad warship the Unsinkable, which tragically sank, and his airship the Indestructible was, destroyed. Malakai had a habit of disproving names, and he was sure he could do it again. But while the forces of evil attacked, Makaisson was still tied up with the Dawizar. He had them on the back foot, and in between the conquering and cleansing, he was taking on odd adventures to really stick it to them. Little by little, they stamped out the last pockets of resistance, and Malakai, motivated by his victories, turned his attention to an even greater menace: elves. Ugh. Though he wasn't too sure where he would find elves in this part of the world. En route to find some pointy-eared sods to smash, Malakai sent a small contingent of slayers and iron drakes to fulfill a most noble goal: to retake the lost stronghold of Karak-Dûm. I'd like to say that this was a valiant and respectable battle demonstrating the greatest of dwarf tactics, but it wasn't. They accomplished the mission, but the masses of dwarves lost to friendly fire and questionable tactics. Well, let's kindly not dwell on that. As Malakai sailed westwards to address the gathering of trolls on his border, he crossed paths with Arbal the Undefeated, and promptly showed him that it's perhaps time for a title change. The twisted followers of Khorne put up a good fight, but they were no match for the sheer ingenuity of the dwarfish war machines. And while Arbal tried his very best to skewer the Slayer engineer, he ultimately met his doom at the end of Gottrik's rune-empowered axe. The distraction had proved costly, however. Malakai had not yet reached his western border when the swell of trolls and Norskans poured forth and laid waste to his lands. The spirit of Grungni surged on full speed ahead, but were once again waylaid by another battle. To be fair to Malakai, they were the elves he'd been looking for. He couldn't just sail on by and leave them be. After a spot of meditative elf bashing and dragon smushing, Malakai and his crew all agreed it was time to get back home for real now and halt the Norskan uprising. Tearing over the mountaintops, the spirit of Grungni caught the warbands unaware. The skirmishes followed thick and fast, and the dwarfs were clearly winning, though any confidence was short-lived, as a mighty demon threw himself into the fray. Not tied to any of the four terrible chaos gods, Entiro commanded bloodlusted marauders and wicked demons of all shapes and horrible designs. This could prove the greatest threat Malakai had ever faced, but that was actually not that difficult at all. Entiro was easily swatted away and skulked back to wherever he came from. The dwarves all agreed that this strange new demon wasn't deserving of a name that incited such mystery and foreboding, so they all agreed from here henceforth he would be referred to simply as Daniel. This distraction gave Throg the means to recuperate for a counterattack, though his tide of brutish Norskan marauders was naught but a wave that crashed upon the stout dwarven warriors and receded back. Malakai took the initiative and pushed them deeper into their homeland, only to hear the war horn sound for yet another demon incursion from across the waters. He was ready to turn back and deal with this new menace, until he discovered that it was just Daniel throwing himself against his settlements. That's no bother, let the little scamp tire himself out. As Malakai drove the trolls and Norskans across the frozen waste, Daniel rallied for a counterattack, and then another, and then another. He really was the most pathetic excuse for a demon Makaisson had ever heard of. One by one, the tribal holds of Dwarfsca fell, and Throg was ejected from the wastes, thrown back across the sea to Albion. With the unruly menace seemingly dealt with, Makaisson laid claim to Dwarfsca, promptly renamed it to Dwarfsca, and allowed his allies in Kislev to settle along its southern shores. And from that moment, life was calm. A new era of stability had dawned. It seemed nothing could go wrong for Malakai and his new nation. As quickly as they declared a new era of stability, it all came toppling down for Malakai and the budding new lands of Dwarfsca. Not only was this new frontier in peril, but the holds liberated from the Dawi Tsar were facing a new challenge, a Skaven assault from the vile Clan Rictus. While Malakai sought to address this problem, ships were spotted off the coast of Dwarfsca, and mere weeks after the Dawi had settled into this new home, they were facing a full-blown chaos invasion. Most of the banners belonged to Sigvald the Magnificent, the decadent host and scion of Slanesh. Malakai knew this was not a foe to take lightly. Joined by Sigvald was Archaon the Ever-Chosen, a Chaos Lord spoken about in hushed legend and cautionary tale, known also as the Herald of the Apocalypse. Along these warships was another, more familiar insignia. Daniel died mere moments after landing on the beaches. To make matters worse, Throg had recovered, and he had a bone to pick. He unleashed his marauders on the western coast of Dwarfsca and started carving through the frozen lands. Skaven from the south, Chaos to the north, Trolls from the west. These were turbulent days for Makaisson's people, with too many fronts to hold. He began recruiting soldiers and slayers, rallying his people to defend the homeland. He tasked a force to try and stem the Skaven tide, with the warning that help may not arrive. Dwarfs are no strangers to holding out against impossible odds. While Malakai met the invading forces of Chaos in the field, an army of slayers pushed north from Karakdoum, slaughtering all in their path.
Don't stop till you're dead!
For every inch the invaders gained in Dwarfsca, they lost a mile in the Chaos wastes. His bold strategy appeared to be working. Not only did it force the invaders to turn their attentions back home, it also meant that Malakai and his armies were killing twice their allotted share of Chaos warriors, which is only a good thing. The Dwarfen resistance was valiant, but the swell of Chaos seemed never ending. Sigvald, who Malakai began referring to as the pretty boy manling, which Felix was ashamed to admit made him rather jealous, landed with a mighty invasion force. Archaon was met valiantly in battle, and the sheer firepower of the Dawi managed to hold him off and force him back. Despite a show of formidable defensive courage, Dwarfsca was overrun. And without wanting its good name to be sullied, Makaisson and his crew agreed they would all go back to naming it Dwarfsca, at least until they drove out the Chaos Spawn.
Get off your boats, lads! Time to fight!
The counterattack from Karakdoum had proved successful. Though the malignant impact of the Chaos Wastes was taking its toll on the Slayer army, they were bruised, battered, and broken. But they had accomplished the impossible. They'd taken vast swathes of the Chaos Wastes and conquered the lands belonging to the so-called Herald of the Apocalypse. The assault on the Skaven had also proved a success. In fact, those involved seemed to be having a bit too much fun carving through any and all ratmen in their path.
Shoot!
Rather than think too much about it, Makaisson figured he'd leave them be and focus his full attention on the Chaos threat on his doorstep. Partly out of strategic maneuvering, partly out of anger, and partly out of spite, Makaisson decided he wanted to lead the charge into the Chaos Wastes and cut the head off the beast itself. Dwarfsca was entirely lost by now, and he stationed a mass of troops led by the fierce demon slayer Fenny Grobby Nutter at the borderlands to quell any future incursions. With only about 30% certainty that this was the right call, he piloted the spirit of Grungni across the frozen sea, piercing the veil of the Chaos Wastes.
Smash and grab, lads!
Before he dealt with more pressing matters, there was one loose end to tie up: Daniel. He who had been entirely useless and toothless and made Malakai embarrassed to call him an enemy was swiftly disposed of with barely a fight to stop it. But as Makaisson tore through stronghold after stronghold of the Chaos Wastes, there came some troubling news. Archaon the Ever-Chosen, Herald of the Apocalypse, Lord of the End Times, had returned. Unsure how or why or what this meant in the grander scheme of things. The news initially troubled the dwarves until they realized this was another chance to kill him again. In every crisis, there is an opportunity. As more ground was gained in the Chaos Wastes, an idea dawned on Malakai. What if this wasn't just a counterattack? What if these violent lands could be subdued? Dwarfs were a hardy bunch, and if anyone could keep a tight hold on these most desolate of plains, it was them. It wouldn't be an easy task. The corruption was rampant, terrors and perils were numerous, rebellions were a daily occurrence, but there could be order. There could be peace. The trouble there, though, was the great threat still present, one of which was the insidious Druki who'd made the Chaos Wastes their home. If he wanted to push further, he'd have to go through them. And it dawned on him. Not only would he be able to safeguard the world and find immortal glory, he'd also get to kill a bunch of elves along the way. So the wanton slaughter found a purpose. Reclaim the Chaos Wastes, or die trying. Malakai's foes were legion, but so too were his allies. His early dealings with Kislev had blossomed into a robust and powerful alliance, one that had a don't ask too many questions rule when it came to Katarina's recent expansions into the Empire, especially considering he was also fostering a relationship with the manfolk of the Empire. Here, dwarfs and men stood united like the glory days of old. Every now and then, the High Elves tried to creep in on this powerful union, to which Malakai promptly told them to sod off. But as the spirit of Grungni tore northwards, a devastating blow was dealt from a foe which Makaisson had, rather embarrassingly, forgotten about. The Skaven of Clan Rictus had regrouped and redoubled their efforts, and the defending force of slayers and savvy engineers could not hold them back. To further Malakai's migraine, the pretty boy manling, Sigvald, not Felix, launched yet another incursion, trying to pierce the borderlands held by Fenny Grobbynutter. The line stood firm, though just barely, with many slayers fulfilling their oath and finding their doom. A second attack would surely break through, and that might come soon, given the Druki had joined the carnage and lent their support to Sigvald. Any gains that had been made were lost. All the dwarf blood spilled to try and bring order to the chaos appeared in vain. Regions were being traded back and forth, and assaults were matched with retaliations, as armies slipped back and forth through the accursed lands. The human and dwarf alliance was strong, and both parties were loyal to their grand goals. Kislev sent aides to counter forces fielded by the Dark Elves, but the foes kept coming. Throg, who both the Kislevites and dwarves were convinced they'd already killed and buried, rejoined the fray with legion upon legion of fresh and fierce Norscan marauders and ferocious monsters. Kislev marched to meet them, while Malakai doubled back to lay waste to Sigvald's incursion. The battles for the borderlands were bloody affairs, but when the spirit of Grungni entered the fight, no amount of wicked chaos magic could protect the invaders. No vile warp incantation was going to save you from a dozen cannon blasts to the face. A series of victories put the invaders on the back foot. Man and dwarf had cut through and reclaimed Norska, aside from a few pockets of resistance. The Skaven slayers down south had also found success, maybe a bit too much, as they appeared to get carried away once more, going entirely on the offensive. One vicious battle rolled into another, and amidst the haze of conflict and the desperate struggle to claim a foothold, Makaisson realized the Chaos Hordes were falling apart. Sigvald made one final cowardly stand with all the forces he could muster, but he proved no threat to the scores of Longbeards, slayers and engineers chomping at the bit for his demise. The dwarfs' victory seemed absolute, though they suspected one last chaos trick as Sigvald appeared to scamper away from the battlefield. Little stood between the dwarfs and utter victory. Kislev had followed them admirably into the Chaos Wastes, and the ruinous powers and their allies were being scattered, one by one. The spirit of Grungni sailed from dark fortress to dark fortress, driving out the terrors within and reclaiming them for his people. Hoping for one final confrontation with the Dark Lord who'd given him so much trouble, Malakai eventually tracked down Sigvald. You might think it unnoble to face a foe with such odds on their side, but Makaisson could not care less. He wanted to hit that stupid pretty face with everything in his arsenal, and that he did. though as he fired off barrage after barrage on that mug most smug, Gotrek saw an opportunity for glory and charged into the fray, adamant to get that killing blow. Did he manage that? Who can say? Sigvald the Magnificent, scion of Slanesh, did not die with any dignity. He begged Malakai for mercy, but was granted none. You will find his remains in a smouldering crater in the Chaos Wastes. Sigvald's demise marks the final hurdle in Makaisson's mission. He'd ousted the last great chaos power from the Northern Wastes, and the remaining Norscan tribes were scattered and stomped out one by one. Former Dwarfsca had been retaken, with the trolls pushed back across the sea to Albion, though not even they would be the worst thing to ever call that island home. Aside from a minor rebellion here or a mad chaos sorcerer taking his dogs for a walk, the Wastes were tamed. A new name for the region was workshopped, and the Makaisson Wastes was the leading suggestion, though jury's still out on that one. The world was safe. A new era of order dawned, and the ironclad alliance between the dwarffolk, Kislev, and the Empire would surely stand as a stout bastion resolute against any other encroaching peril. And it is imperative that I mention that as much as the elves tried to get in on this alliance and pestered incessantly to be involved, they were consistently told to sod off back to their stupid island by Malakai. Chaos was tamed. The Skaven walloped back into hiding, and it seems the elves had got the message and gone back to doing whatever it is that elves do. Malakai's purpose had been fulfilled, and he was free to continue his adventures, testing his newest inventions and seeking his glorious doom. Though he figured that might elude him, as he had essentially saved the entire world and it was clear nothing would ever go wrong again, with safe times from here on out. Oh, what's that? The Skaven burrows? A vermintide? Well, that certainly doesn't sound good. We'll let the elves deal with that one. And that was the very uncanon tale of Malakai Makaisson. If you've managed to stick around until now, thank you. That means a lot. I've had a ton of fun making this. My name is Willis, and this channel is a bit of a bizarre idea I've had for a while, and I'm making these videos to blow off steam and work on something a bit different. If you've had fun here today and want to see more, let me know in the comments. This is a new and slightly mad idea that I'm experimenting with, so any feedback and thoughts are appreciated. This will be a bit of a journey that'll take me across a bunch of different games, so if you want to be around for that and hear more of these made-up stories, a like, a subscribe, and a comment lets me know you're listening. Again, thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear from you with any suggestions, opinions, or other games or lords you want to get the old story treatment, and I will see you another time.